I'm very glad that today we will open our lecture series of AVA in this summer term. And I'm also very glad that Agatha and me, that we today we invited Bogdan Athanassov, who will give the first lecture. And I will now introduce very shortly Bogdan Athanassov to you. He is an assistant professor for prehistory at the Department of Archaeology of the New Bulgarian University and director of the Lab for Archaeometry and Experimental Archaeology at this university. Bogdan studied archaeology in Sofia, Athens, and Heidelberg, and he is interested, as probably most of you know, in the prehistory and early history of Southeastern Europe and the Eastern Mediterranean. Bogdan runs a lot of projects. So recently he is the co-director of the excavations of the fortified settlement Plesto from the end of the late Bronze Age, 13th, 12th century BCE in southeast Bulgaria. The project started in 2012 and it is still ongoing. Bogdan works in Presto together with Philip Stockhammer, who's all today attending the talk, and with Ilya Kulov from the Regional Museum of History in Blagoevgrad. The imported North Aegean Mycenaean pottery and sophisticated architecture in Presto was already thematized in several papers dealing with the role of the Rhodope Mountains as a contact area between North Aegean and the Upper Thrace. In 2009 to 2012, Bogdan co-directed archaeological field surveys in the Bulgarian part of the valley of Struma-Strumon. Since 2022, he has been surveying the middle valley of the Tundra River and the area of Sliven, some 100 kilometers to the west of the Black Sea. Bogdan is also the co-organizer of the conference, The Social Dimension of Food in the Prehistoric Balkans, which took place at the Akademie der Wissenschaften in Heidelberg, so Academy of Science in Heidelberg, and was published by Bogdan and other colleagues in 2018. In 2010, he co-edited the proceedings of a conference on archaeology of power, which took place at the New Bulgarian University. In his PhD, Bogdan processed the documentation and the finds from the excavations of the late Bronze Age settlement in Durankolak, very well known, on the western Black Sea coast, which were carried out in the 1980s by Henrietta Todorova. Luckily, Durankolak and Plesto date to the same period, and this allowed Bogdan to gain some first-hand impressions of this vibrant period in two distinct but interconnected areas of the Balkan Peninsula. So just to let you know some other papers written by Bogdan, so there are a lot. I will not list them all, don't be afraid, but I want to mention some of the papers where also Philip Stockhammer and others are co-authors, for example, Traveling Objects and Traveling Ideas, on this famous conference where also I was lucky to take part of Josef Maran and others, where we dealt with objects and ideas and travelers. And also Bogdan and Philip Stockhammer published, for example, the Vestalsche Kreis as Basis of Contact, or together with Maria Ivanova, the already mentioned introduction of the book of Social Dimension of Food. So we really look forward to learn about more of the late Bronze Age and the settlements from which you have really good insight. Bogdan, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much for this kind introduction, and also for the invitation to speak in the Black Sea series of Arwa. Now you should be able to see my screen. Let me do some short adjustments. September 1st began a new epoch in my life, an expedition all on my own to the tropics. With this sentence, written with enthusiasm in September 1914, in Port Moresby in Papua New Guinea, begins the private diary of Bronislaw Malinowski. Malinowski planned to spend several months in New Guinea and Australia, but World War I compelled him to stay longer in the area. The results of his fieldwork carried in the Trobriand Islands in 1516 and 1718 were published in 1922, shortly after Malinowski's return to Europe. The Argonauts of the Western Pacific an account of native enterprise and adventure in the archipelagos of Melanesian New Guinea. This book brought Malinowski a successful academic career at the London School of Economics, where he became foundation professor of social anthropology. Moreover, the Argonauts fundamentally changed anthropology more than any other ethnographic monograph. The central topic of the Argonauts is Kula, the ceremonial exchange between islanders of the Masim archipelago in the east of Papua New Guinea. Malinowski qualifies the exchange as ceremonial because it was highly regulated and differed from trade. One could exchange only necklaces of red shell for white shell and vice versa. Necklaces were handled down from individual to individual in clockwise direction, whereas arm shells circulated anti-clockwise around the same group of islands described by Malinowski as ring. Once a participant in Kula was given an object, let's say an arm shell, this person was obliged, sooner or later, in some cases after a year or even longer, to give back a necklace as a counter-gift. Today, we could call this a delayed reciprocity. These objects were not kept in private possession for a very long time, and they were not owned by the people who exchanged them. Some anthropologists call them system communal property. Malinowski underlines that arm shells and necklaces did not have the function of money. Islanders could not exchange them for practical things such as food or canoes, for example. All these features inevitably bring the question about the motivation of the islanders to participate in the Kula exchange. For Malinowski, there is no doubt that the answer of the why to Kula question is related to the partnerships and the social bonds which emerge between the participant. He calls Kula, so this is these are the characteristics of Kula. I am a bit behind with the slides. And here we come to the why to Kula question. And Malinowski calls Kula intertribal institution and speaks of a Kula community which consists of a village or a number of villages who go out together on big overseas expeditions and who act as a body in the Kula transactions, perform their magic in common, have common leaders, and have the same inner and outer social sphere with which they exchange their valuables. Kula is related with communal and often ritualized elements, such as the construction and launching of the canoes. Sailing is also an occupation which creates and enhances ties between the members of the crew, and insofar usually several canoes go on expeditions, many people take part in this process. However, Kula exchange not only brings people together, but also divides people in the sense that men who excel in Kula and come to the temporary possession of famous rings or necklaces accumulate prestige. As you can imagine, generations of anthropologists were attracted by Kula, and already Malinowski's students realized that the Kula ring, as described in the Argonauts, looked a bit too rounded and controversial in some aspects. The main question is how much utilitarian trade is essential and luxury resources takes place on Kula in essentials, and luxury resources take place on Kula expeditions. Malinowski underlined that utilitarian trade was conceptually and behaviorally separate from Kula exchange. How was the relative values of the exchange necklaces and arm rings determined is another important question. What were the sanctions underlying Kula reciprocity? What prevented participants from keeping famous objects in their private possession? And of course, how did Kula change over time? It is difficult to imagine that such a complicated system remained static and didn't lead to transformations of the involved individuals and societies. Everyone who is acknowledged with the discussions on exchange in trade in Bronze Age Europe will come to the question about the applicability and the relevance of the New Guinean Kula exchange and Bronze Age trade. New Papua's rather egalitarian societies and the communal property of Kula valuables seems too much better fit the Neolithic than the Bronze Age, with the considerable accumulations of private wealth, as we can see in the rich Mycenaean shaft graves from the mid-2nd millennium BC, or in the wealth transported by the ship, which at the end of the 14th century BC sank near the Cape of Uluburun in Turkey. Some of the main characteristics of 2nd millennium BC Bronze Age trade were traced in a very influential paper by Andrew and Susan Sherratt, published 20-some years ago. But as you can see from a recent survey offered by Sarah Murray, despite the huge advances in the field, there are still some common understandings. The ease of sea transport in the Bronze Age Aegean Mediterranean is the main factor which leads to economic specialization. The specialization triggers mass production of many items such as oxhide ingots, pottery, wine, oils. Well-organized international trade driven by economically and politically powerful agents and also by wealthy, semi-independent merchants makes participants to this economy richer and also more interdependent. This is how, in the course of the 2nd millennium, we see a move from high-value luxuries, prestige objects, to rather standardized commodities produced in bigger qualities. And here you can see a small part of the copper oxide ingots found in the Uluburun shipwreck. So why do you need Kula and Malinowski to study Bronze Age trade and interaction? The reason is that we see some Kula-like features in the picture of the Black Sea area in the 2nd millennium BC. One of these features is the passing of valuable objects from hand to hand, and also the absence of rich graves and the quite egalitarian settlements. So in some respects, we see a mixture between a stratified, complicated Bronze Age economy and a rather egalitarian Neolithic way of life. So the first question which a paper about the Western Pontic area should address is how much and to what extent was the Western Pontic area part of the Eastern Mediterranean trade in the second millennium BC. Of course, once we speak about the sea, the Black Sea, we will ask how interconnected were different parts of this basin. What was the nature of interaction between the western, northern, southern littorals, and here we have a theory about the existence of a circumpontic metallurgical province, which was suggested by Evgeny Chernykh already in the 70s. Our evidence will start with oxide ingots, the most international objects which we find in the Western Pontic area in the second millennium BC. Starting from south, from the Mediterranean to the north, we will begin with a hoard found near the shores of the Marmara Sea. It is in the area Kosmandere, near the village of Sharkyoy, in the district of Tekirdak. All these three names are names with which you see this hoard in the literature. It was initially dated to the very end of the Bronze Age by the publishers Hermankaya, but later studies by Sven Hansen and Reichard Jung suggested also somehow older dates like the 13th century BC. What is interesting in this hoard is that it offers a mixture of Mediterranean objects such as the sword, which you can see, and also the metal cup, but also sickles and axes of a Balkan type. And it is amazing that both metal cups and sickles and socketed axes are very standardized objects found in great quantities, but in these two different areas, sickles and socketed axes in Europe and the Balkans, and these bronze cups in the Levant. So we will not exaggerate too much if one could say that the people who buried the hoard of Kosmandere were able to speak both languages of the Mediterranean and of the Balkans. If we move to the north, we will reach Chernozem, another ingot which was most probably hoarded, but if this was a hoard, it was a single object hoard, so no other objects are reported, and also no settlement or grave finds are reported for this place. It is extremely interesting for the study of the production technology of oxide ingots for two reasons. The first is that unlike the ingots which we know from the Mediterranean, it was never underwater and the preservation conditions are much, much better. And the other is that this ingot was marked later after the production. So as you can see from this line here, it was produced in two pores, so two crucibles of metal, and then later one added a little bit of metal here. Can you see my mouse? Probably no. Yes. One added a little bit of metal here where the mark is in order to have soft metal to place the mark. Fragment of an oxide ingot was found in Kirilovo, not far from Chernozem. Again, no secure context. So we don't know anything, but for sure not from a site or from a grave. And then an ingot which comes somehow closer to the sea, Cherkovo, and here we have some indications of late Bronze Age pottery, which however, couldn't be proven by scholars who visited the place in recent years. These are finds from the second half of the 20th century. Two pieces, two oxhide ingots, were purchased from the museum in Varna, by the museum in Varna from looters, who claimed that they found them in the area of Razgrad, the village of Kamenovo, and as you can see here again, we have very interesting indications of production techniques. So the question about the provenience of Eastern Balkan oxide ingots is, of course, important for their interpretations. As Ernst Perninska from the current Engelholm Center of Archaeometry and his colleagues were able to show, these ingots were made of Cypriot copper and not only Cypriot, but copper which fits very well the results from the analysis of the ingots from the shipwreck of Uluburun. Already in the 90s, the team from Oxford, Noam Gale and Sofia Stoshgale, expressed the theory that early ingots are made out of several ores, but after the 14th century, we see that almost every sampled oxide ingot was made with copper coming from one simple place, namely the Apliki mines on Cyprus. And the ingots from Bulgaria fit very well these chemical results. Not only the lead isotope analysis, but also the casting techniques cast no doubt that the Balkan ingots come from Cyprus. But when did they come? When were they brought from the Mediterranean? The shapes and the types of ingots do not help very much. We can differentiate between type A, which is very early, this pillow-like type, and some types of two, which were in use in the 14th, 11th centuries BC. A way to date oxide ingots is also to see the technique of marking them. So the ingots from Uluburun, which are from the late 14th century, are all marked with narrow marks, whereas the later, for example, those from Cape Caledonia from the 12th century have wider grooved, and all the Balkan ingots have these narrow marks. So if you put together the evidence from the only object which has context, Kosmandere, then the resemblance in the lead isotopes between the Balkan pieces and Uluburun, and also the rather early type of marks, which dates prior to the mid-13th century, then carefully we could date the Balkan ingots in the period of 14th, 13th, early or first half of the 13th century BC. The next question which these finds bring is, why to bring Cypriot copper in an area which is rich in copper. So in the Eastern Balkans, you can find, we have rich in copper sources, the famous Ibonar from the Copper Age, but also not far from Burgas, and also in the Central Balkans, the Bor and Rudna Glava areas. An answer would be, okay, they had copper, but it was easy to sail, and that's why they were able also to import Cypriot copper. And as you can see, maritime routes are considered also very important for the movement of Cypriot coppers to Sardinia, and also to the Caput Agri, which would be the last stop before an inland route leading to in South Germany, where we have the northern piece. It's this interpretation for the Eastern Balkans. See evidence of regular Black Sea navigation in the late Bronze Age. As you can see, all the finds come from the land, and with the exception of Kuzmandere, none of the oxide ingots were hoarded close to the Black Sea. In the literature, you will find some indication of an oxide ingot from Sozopol, but this is a big mistake, so it was never found underwater. And also in older papers, an oxide ingot from Kalyakra. Cape Kalyakra is here in the north. But it's turned also that it's not an oxide ingot at all. The only exception, so the only metal pieces which could date to the Bronze Age are bun ingots from Maslenos Cape, here with green, which have shapes which are pretty close to those from Uluburum, but their chemical composition differs a lot from what we know from the Aegean, and also the preservation is pretty different. Of course, the salinity of the Black Sea and the Mediterranean are different, but here I see a huge difference in the preservation conditions. So colleagues of mine and myself, we think that these Maslenos ingots could be much younger. An important argument for the proponents of Black Sea navigation in the late Bronze Age are stone anchors, which are very close to stone anchors found in the Eastern Mediterranean in the second millennium. But their number is much higher than in the Eastern Mediterranean, and this made Athanassov to suggest that if we would date all these anchors to the Black Sea, to the Bronze Age, then we would have a much more intensive navigation in the late Bronze Age in the Black Sea than in the Eastern Mediterranean, which somehow doesn't sound very logical. There are also some other problems. For example, that on one piece of such an anchor, we have a lunar sigma, which is rather, so the Greek letter of sigma, which is rather a late, very late date, but this could be reused. So these anchors remain somehow between the two worlds, between the Bronze Age and the first millennium. Another argument against regular and intensive navigation in the late Bronze Age Black Sea is the complete absence of Mycenaean pottery. It is strange and difficult to understand why already in the Sea of Marmara we don't find a single pottery short of Mycenaean wares. And this is a huge contrast to what we know, for example, from Troya. We find Mycenaean pottery. This is not just a matter of preservation, for example, or not enough intensive research, because we find Mycenaean pottery in the Rhodope Mountains. And this is very interesting because it's much more difficult to travel through the mountains than to follow the river valleys of Maritza, Turkish Meric, Greek Evros, or of the river Struma, Greek Strimon. So somehow the easy routes, the maritime routes and the river valleys were avoided, but we see the spread of this pottery in the mountains. And this is something interesting because it shows that least cost analysis doesn't work. And the reason for the occurrence of Mycenaean pottery and fortified settlements and warrior graves only in the Rhodope Mountains, not further north. So none of these elements exist further north of the Rhodope Mountains, are of course complex. But the recent excavations in Adatepe in the Rhodope, which revolutionized the archaeology of Bronze Age Eastern Balkans, shed some light because the excavators were able to find a big gold mine, with gold mining starting in the middle of the second millennium, 16th, 15th century BC. And this intensive metallurgy is probably the answer of the question, why Rhodope and not along the coast of the seas? Another argument against the hypothesis of intensive Black Sea navigation in the late Bronze Age is the very low density of second millennium BC sites along the western Black Sea coast. So if you start from the Danube Delta in Romania and you go until the Bosphorus, you see the very extremely low number of sites which are next to the coast. We have Turankulak in the north of Bulgaria, very close to the Bulgarian Romanian border, and another site, Vratica, which is some 20 to 30 kilometers far away from the Black Sea. And this picture is not the result of insufficient research, because we have a good amount of sites from the Copper Age, from the 5th millennium BC, and also from the 3rd millennium BC, both on the ground, in the littoral, and underwater. Here I have to note the very intensive work of the Center for Underwater Archaeology in Sozopol, and probably the most expensive underwater project in the history of maritime archaeology, the Black Sea project, which couldn't change this picture. So we have good reasons to think that for reasons which we do not understand yet, there were less sites on the littoral in the second millennium than in the previous periods, and also then of course, in the Iron Age. And as you know well, the seacraft from the Bronze Age were not big enough, so they needed to stop often for water, food, and other supplies. I cannot imagine a regular navigation with almost no settlements. Here you can see Duranculac, which I mentioned. It's located on this peninsula, and the lake of Duranculac, which is around. You see the Black Sea and Romania. But what is extremely interesting, and we owe it to the zoological analysis of Henriette Manhart, is that the people in Duranculac consumed mainly fish from the sea, from the lake, but no deep water fish, which means that if they there is no doubt that they had some kind of sea craft, some canoes or so, but deep water fish was not often on the menu. And once we speak about Duranculac, let me show you what we know about this site. We see horseshoe-like small houses with stone foundations, which are located on the slope of this peninsula, and after a phase of the green phase, after a first phase with houses which have their entrances to the lower part, to the lake. Then we have a huge episode of terracing of the settlement, and then the construction of almost apsidal houses, which means the parallel walls are parallel, which you can see with the red color. Another argument in favor of the rather inland routes and not the maritime routes comes from the distribution of scepters made of stone and metal. And I'm very happy that Professor Maya Vasileva from my university is also here today, because she offered a great study of these stone scepters, which have a very good counterpart in the shipwreck of Ulupurun. And here is the place to say that this scepter from Ulupurun is the only object which is easily identifiable as Balkan import or Black Sea imports in the south. All the other imports, ingots, swords, come from the south to the north. Then if we have rather inland and not maritime routes, we get a problem, because it becomes even more difficult to explain why do we have these Cypriot ingots in the Balkans. One possible answer is that special objects like swords, for example, should be produced with a very special metal. And this is a hypothesis which was published by Reinhard Jung and Matthias Mayhofer. We need more research, but the preliminary picture of lead isotopes does not show any fit between the known bronze objects from the Eastern Balkans and the Cypriot oxide ingots. So this is not the last word on this question, but we don't see an overlap. To put it elsewhere, we have hundreds of bronze objects sampled from the Eastern Balkan, and none of them seems to be made of Cypriot copper. This sounds very illogical, but we have a very similar situation on Sardinia. And this was the reason for Professor Vasiliki Kasianidou to compare this with bringing coast to Newcastle, because Sardinia has even more copper sources than the Eastern Balkans, but we find a high amount of Cypriot oxide ingot fragments in hoards and in other contexts. And again, we have the question, why to bring copper from Cyprus. Here, in the case of Sardinia, we have two independent teams, the one from Oxford, Gales, and the other from Mannheim, Perenicka, who came to the same conclusion. Bronze objects were not produced with imported Cypriot copper. Then we have to look for another reason to bring coast to Newcastle, and another reason could be related with the existence of a big metallurgical center in northeast Bulgaria. I already mentioned the hoards, the ingots from Kamenovo in the area of Razgrad. Not far from this area was found one of the most important mound hoards in Bronze Age Europe, where, as you can see, there is a mound for a metal scepter-like object, which reminds us very much what Professor Vasileva mapped and what we have in stone in Uluburun, but also some mound for swords of northwestern type, Krasnomayarsk, for example, and also mounts for objects which we never found, like metal vessels, for example. You can see them here to the left. Already in the 70s, Chernig defined northeast Bulgaria as an important metallurgical center with very clear contact to the northwest Pontic areas, but also with some contacts with the Aegean and with the south. And here is the place to say that the best counterpart of a sword found in Hattusha, in the Hittite capital, comes also from northwest Bulgaria. This is this piece which you see in the right corner of the slide, which was bent, it was destroyed ceremonially, and most probably hoarded. So this Dichevo Center, it's how Chernig called it in northeast Bulgaria, imported its entire metal, and this is more or less normal. They have some Aegean imported swords, as I show you, but what is interesting is that many of the Balkan swords are kind of local variation of Aegeanizing swords, not direct Aegean imports. And this is a very interesting feature which were noted already in the late 60s by Bernhard Hensel and was elaborated by Reinhard Jung. So it's possible that oxide ingots were used for special objects, for the production of special objects, which we have not found, and we have not sampled so far, but it's possible that oxide ingots had other value, which goes beyond the practical use of ingots as a commodity, as a raw material, for people involved in metallurgy. And when we speak about the value of ingots, we should here do a huge leap to Egypt, to Karnak, where we see that the pharaoh Amenhotep II, who reigned in the late 15th century, is depicted as a man with a bow who pierced a copper ingot of type 2C or 1B with 5 arrows. And this depiction has also a text which helps us to understand it, but even without the text, it looks very obvious that already in the Aegean world, in the Eastern Mediterranean, Egypt is not the Aegean, but in the Eastern Mediterranean, oxide ingots were not simply commodities, but also objects with symbolic value. And this was the biggest, the most massive metal object, and it was a demonstration of power to be able to pierce an ingot with an arrow, something which I doubt that ever happened. If we try to summarize what we saw, it's obvious that the Balkan oxide ingots are of Cypriot origin. They came over land routes, so no canoes, no direct parallels to the Trobriand Islands, but also no arrow coming from Uluburun and ending somewhere in the Western Pontic area. The driving force for this exchange was the agency of local metallurgists. And Kuzmandere, near the Marmara Sea, is the place where two different worlds, the maritime world and the Balkan world, met. In order to make this more clear, so it's quite sure that these ingots were produced on Cyprus with metal from Apliki, and then they were put on a ship which sailed to the west. And it's probable that an important stop of this ship was Rhodes, the island of Rhodos, Rhodes. And here, just to open a parenthesis, we have pommels of swords from Adaptepe, from the Rhodope area, which have parallels to pommels from swords in found on Rhodes, but also in the area of Volos, Thessaly, where Agate now is. The next important step of this must be Troy. So we have no direct evidence, but Troy is the last place seen from the south where we find Cypriot pottery. So direct contacts between Troy and Cyprus are something which is quite acceptable. And here, we have to take into consideration that if you read about Vilusha in the Hittite sources, written sources, you will learn that it was a small vassal state. But if you look at the archaeology of Troy, of the archaeological picture, you will see that it's the most impressive architecturally site on the entire Western Anatolian coast. So we see a huge discrepancy of the way Troy appears seen from the Hittites and the actual wealth of this place. And it's possible that the key position of Troy in such an exchange between the Mediterranean and the Balkans, the Western Black Sea area, is the reason for the wealth of this polity or area, which, however, remained hidden for the Hittite administration. Then from Troy, we probably go to the Rhodope area, and here the evidence is again indirect. These are the warrior graves with weapons, the settlements with fortification walls, with terrace walls, with houses with stone foundations, so no fortifications to the north of the Rhodope, no terraces until the 13th century to the north of the Rhodope. And again, the scepters, which we find in the Rhodope Stranja area. And then from Rhodops, we have the northwest Bulgaria, where we have our metallurgical center. The arrow, which leads from northwest Bulgaria to the northwest Pontic area, has a different color because we don't have evidence for oxide ingots going so far. But we are pretty sure that there were intensive contacts. And for example, the best parallels of the discs from the horde of Rochitron, which comes from central North Bulgaria, are in the lower Danube and the northwestern area. So if you come to the entering questions, how much and to what extent was the Western Pontic area part of the Eastern Mediterranean trade in the second millennium, then we should say that it was not part of the Mediterranean trade, but was connected to it. So I doubt that people from Cyprus ever came to the Western Black Sea and vice versa, but they probably had some indirect mythical knowledge about each other, and this is indicated by the scepter from Uluburun. The other question was about the interconnected, the level of interconnections around the Black Sea. And here we see huge difference between these intensive links between Ukraine, Romania, and Bulgaria on the one side, and the complete absence of links between, let's say, Bulgarian and Turkish coasts, not to speak of West and East Black Sea coasts, Georgia. And so that's why I don't think we should speak of the circumpontical, circumpontic metallurgical province, but rather of specific lines of intensive trade. Then again, why these ingots? Why should they come to, why should they bring them to Bulgaria, but also to Sardinia? Here, we should just relax a little bit and remind ourselves that also anthropologists have problems. Why Kula, even if Kula is much better documented by Malinowski and by people who worked in the area until the disappearance of Kula in the last decades, but they still don't know why Kula. And I think there are two structural parallels. Both types of objects, oxhide ingots and necklaces and arm shells, have the potential to connect people. In New Guinea, this is the islanders, and in the Balkans and Northwestern Anatolia, these were people which were involved in metallurgy. But also, these types of objects had the potential also to bring prestige to some of their owners. Another parallel between ingots and Kula is that Kula objects were given away. You were never a definite owner of them. And also oxhide ingots seems to were given away because they were ceremonially hoarded and given to the gods. Thank you very much for your attention. Exactly with the end, we have the church bell here. I hope it's not too loud.
No, no.